Welcome to Psychological Explorations with Dr. Michael Axelman and Daniela as we explore the life of Elvis Presley, the world's greatest, saddest Oedipal victor. We examine through a psychoanalytic lens the triadic relationships between Elvis, his mother Gladys, and Father Vernon today. Drawn heavily from the two-volume biography by Peter Garelnick, just exceptional. The first volume, The Last Train to Memphis, The Rise of Elvis Presley, concludes with the death of Gladys in 1958. The second volume, Careless Love, The Unmaking of Elvis Presley. A few selected quotes. He believed he could do everything until the day he died. And we'll explore together how he was organized by his omnipotence of this unresolved Oedipal stage that we'll be exploring. And Garelnick says, I was trying to tell an honest and true story as I could. Really, the challenge is to portray the world the person lives in. And in the first volume, it was an expanding world. You can see in Careless Love how constricted Elvis's world becomes. So let's take a look at Freud and what's become called the Oedipal complex. And I quote from Freud 1924, the boy regards his mother as his own property, but he finds one day that she has transferred her love or solicitude to a new arrival. The absence of satisfaction hoped for, the continued denial of the desired baby must, in the end, lead the small lover to turn away from the hopeless longing and somehow accept this compromise. So we're going from a study that begins with the child coming into the world in little bits and pieces, and through mirroring and good enough parenting, the child establishes a unit status, and the mother and baby are one. And this is followed by a hatching of the child, and it coincides with motor development and crawling, and the child develops mastery away from the mother and can return to the mother, and is somehow able to see mother over this period as becoming distinguished and being a whole person that's separate from him or her. And as these two-person relationships are moving into a resolution, the third, the father, and this triadic relationship becomes the next relational challenge. So we go from the mother-infant bond to triangulated relationships, where the child will continue to accept but challenge the existence of whole people, and come to accept over time, this is the compromise. I want mom all to myself, but dad has mom. I can grow up and be just like dad, that identification, and find someone just like mom and move into this improved reality testing. So the case with the Oedipal victory, and victory is really, it's such a improper word, but it does capture a certain aspect of the dynamic for sure. The child is able to garner mother's passion, full attention. The child remains poorly individuated and has trouble distinguishing their desires separate from their mother's desires. Binding and delegating forces predominate in the dyad. We think here in the more contemporary times of the helicopter parent syndrome. Child is able to have more influence on mother than father, and the child is left unable to discover the limits to their own omnipotence. So under unfavorable conditions, the mother remains as primary partner. And even though the son may be able to forge relations with women outside of the home, these relations remain secondary, amounting to a case of repeated, careless love, as Garonak so aptly named his second volume. Back to Elvis. So Vernon and Gladys got married. It was June 1933. Gladys was kind of a wild lady for her time and was enjoying quite a bit of time frolicking out with young adults. Vernon was not driven or motivated. He worked at any job he could find. For a while, he and Vester, his older brother, farmed together, raising cotton, corn, soybeans, a few hogs. Later, he took a job with the WPA, a federal government make work program during the Depression. Next, he drove a delivery truck for McCarty's in Tupelo, that's Tupelo, Mississippi, a wholesale grocer, delivering grocery items to stores throughout the northeast of Mississippi. Vernon. So married in 33, and Elvis born January 8th, 1935. Not long before dawn Elvis, Aaron Presley was born. Gladys delivered a second son earlier that morning, a stillborn identical twin named Jesse Garin. Elvis would be their only child. After the birth, Gladys was close to death, and both she and Elvis were taken to Tupelo Hospital. After Gladys and Elvis returned home, it was noticed by family members and friends that she was overprotective of her new son. And Elvis was raised by Gladys and again told that he would gain the strength of both twins and that he was superhuman, super powerful because the way that he came into the world as the surviving twin. So in May 1938, Vernon was sentenced to 3 years in Mississippi State Penitentiary at the Parchman Farm for forging the checks. He was 21 years old at the time, and Vernon served 9 months of a 3-year sentence. And Elvis was just a toddler at this phase. And it would seem then that Elvis, cherished by his mother beyond all ordinary limits, was also to be a son spoiled beyond all ordinary limits. But was not that simple. The fact was that from the age of 3, Elvis regarded himself as the head of the family and conducted himself in that manner. And you can imagine what it's like being 4 or 5 years old and being the head of a family. And I quote, "I'm so nervous. I've always been so nervous ever since I was a kid." So you can see the anxiety that becomes an associated symptom that goes along with the Oedipal victory. From childhood fantasy to the Elvis Presley show. When I was a child, I was a dreamer. I read comic books and I was the hero of the comic book. I saw movies and I was the hero in the movie. So every dream I have ever dreamed has come true 1,000 times. In psychoanalytic thinking, we call this the overuse of fantasy as a defense. And it doesn't allow one to move properly into good reality testing, appropriate reality testing. So what's noted in the family triangle is the absence of paternal identification. Identification in which the child adapts by incorporating into his or her superego, or ego more generally, the personality characteristics of the same-sex parent. This diminishes his castration anxiety as the boy finds his likeness in his father, and it is this identification which protects him from the consequences of their rivalry. So there was this absence of paternal identification and enmeshment, an enmeshed diet with mother. Elvis and Gladys playing house. Gladys was foolish about Elvis, just foolish. All her friends, neighbors, and relatives agree. She never let the boy out of her sight. And it was Elvis's job to enliven Gladys, which was harder and harder for him to do over time. And once he started to become a little bit famous, it was really hard for her. From then on, to Gladys's confusion, there seemed to exist two Elvises. Her own son, whose every thought and hope and fear she has shared with him and whom she understood so well, and this other almost unreal creature whom she hardly ever saw, but who jumped out at her with increasing frequency from newspapers and magazines, and whose separate existence belonged not only to the public, which she was forced to accept. And I continue a little bit farther on. After Elvis became famous, Gladys was never happy another day. Only when he would come back, the little he could, to be with her in Memphis. Then she'd be all right for a spell. Elvis as Oedipal Victor and a rare picture of Gladys smiling. I guess we overprotected him, was the way Gladys put it, never for a moment noticing that it was Elvis who was overprotecting her. And in 1957, he gave her Graceland plus the pink Cadillac, though she was never able to drive it. But the pink Cadillac was for Gladys. And Elvis fails, unable to lift her mood or quell her anxiety. One night, Gladys screamed to Vernon from a dream, "I see our boy, he's in a blazing car." The following day, Elvis called her from Texarkana and said his rented Cadillac had burst into flames, and he narrowly escaped. The overwrought, now alcoholic Gladys started popping pills to sleep, speed to wake up, and greater quantities of vodka to cope. Elvis would shower her with gifts, but even the most extravagant now left her cold. "Mama, what do you want?" pleaded Elvis. "For you to stay home, baby," Gladys would cry. Frank Richards dropped by Graceland for the first time and said to Elvis's mother, "I guess you must be about the happiest woman in the world." "You got it wrong," she said. "I'm the most miserable woman in the world." I'm guarded. I can't buy my own groceries. I can't see my neighbor. And we move now to the final year of Gladys's life. Elvis is drafted into the army. Between March 28th and September 17th, 1958, he belonged to the Company A, 2D Medium Tank Battalion, 37th Armor, stationed in Fort Hood, Texas, and he completed basic and advanced military training during this period in 58. And this began in March, and Gladys suddenly died of cirrhosis of the liver in August 16th, 1958. The death broke my heart. Tears streamed down his cheeks. He cried throughout the interview. "She's all we lived for," he sobbed. "She was always my best girl." The scene at the cemetery. She's not dead. She's just sleeping. As her body was lowered to her resting place. "Goodbye, darling. I love you so much. I lived my whole life just for you. I lost the only person I ever loved." From that day on, according to his friends, he became an utterly different person. Basically, Elvis's personality was that of Gladys's, Lamar wrote. There wasn't a dime's worth of difference between them. Dreamland. Graceland. You know Graceland. It's Dreamland here with the pink Cadillac. And the sadness here is just, oof. He felt a new serenity in his life. You can see no longer did he have to try to enliven Gladys, that incredible responsibility of the Oedipal victor. To the guys, it seemed more like madness, and they felt increasingly alienated, resentful, bewildered, and angry all at once. Elvis appeared to be leaving them with his almost daily visions, his tales of going off in a spaceship, his delusions of being able to turn the sprinkler system of the Bel Air Country Club golf course behind the house on and off with his thoughts, his conviction that he could cure them of everything from the common cold to more serious aches and pains by his healing powers. To Marty, he announced that a bird song had turned into the voice of Christ. And under other circumstances, they might have been tempted to commit him to a doctor's care. But reason told them that he would come out of it. He would come out of this obsession too, just as he'd come out all the other momentary impulses and infatuations. So this overuse of fantasy as a defense and the inability to find the limits of his omnipotence are so clearly expressed at this phase in his life. His relationship with his father deteriorates further after the death of Gladys. After Gladys's death, Elvis and Vernon's relationship further deteriorated, according to individuals who were close to the singer. The tensions that existed between the father and son persisted. Vernon had been seeing younger women, and it was too damn quick after Gladys's death. Elvis resented the hell out of it. Billy Smith, Elvis's cousin, told Alana Nash. So at the very end here, we're moving into the 70s. And father and son enter hospital at the same time, February 1975. Vernon had a heart attack and was admitted to the same hospital. Elvis ensured his father had the room next to his own. They didn't bring each other much comfort, though. Vernon began to blame his heart attack on his son. He also said that Elvis's mother's death had been Elvis's fault. So right up to the end, you can see that there was no resolution in the father-son relationship. And Gladys, even after her death, is still there as such a powerful force in the triangle. Elvis died of a heart attack August 16th, 1977, and a little bit less than 2 years later, Vernon died. Peter Garelnick, the remarkable biographer of Elvis, and I quote, "Everyone looked at him like he was their savior. Everywhere he went, he was an object of admiration, of adoration. And yet he couldn't muffle the growing discontent, the helplessness he felt at his inability to control not so much the world around him as his private world, the inner world that was revealed to no one but him. He constructed a shell to hide his aloneness, and it hardened on his back. I know of no sadder story."
Saw for the first time on television a young gentleman